Good evening. The UN talked yesterday about Ukraine but couldn't do very much. NATO's been talking today and it's not clear what they'll be able to do to change things on the ground. And things on the ground are looking worse than ever. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister had a stark message for people living in the east. Flee, run for your lives while you still can. They've been running for their lives in Mariupol, thousands of them, with horrific tales of what's left behind. Later on in this hour, we'll hear from an MP from Mariupol about the people who've managed to get out and the others who are still trapped. In the last hour in Brussels, NATO's foreign ministers ended a day of meetings. As they walked in, the Secretary-General warned the war was unlikely to end anytime soon.
We set out to do three things if Russia decided to pursue this horrific aggression against Ukraine. One was to support our Ukrainian partners. We're doing that. Two was to put extraordinary pressure on Russia. We're doing that. Three was to make sure that we were shoring up the defenses of our own alliance, NATO, and we're doing that. And today, tomorrow, we'll continue to talk about not only how we can sustain these efforts, but how we can build upon them. Second, as the Secretary General said, we're also in a period of tremendous importance for the future of our alliance, not just with regard to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, but more broadly, going toward the NATO summit, a new strategic concept that will be very much informed by what's happening now in Europe, but also by other challenges that we have to face together as an alliance. So this is an important moment for us to come together, to continue to do the work leading up to the summit, the new strategic concept, working with new partners, all of which we'll be doing in the next 2 days.
Antony Blinken there. Well, we're joined now live from Washington for a military analysis from Doug Brooks. He's President Emeritus of the International Stability Operations Association, and he keeps a very close eye indeed on the fighting in Ukraine. Doug, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Still no NATO boots on the ground or planes in the sky. But NATO foreign ministers, as we heard, they're holding talks today about how to support Ukraine further. What more can the alliance do?
I think we're already seeing they're starting to, we're seeing the Czech Republic, I should say, shipping tanks now into Ukraine. They're also shipping additional weapons. And I think all throughout the war, behind the scenes, there's been a lot of intelligence that's been fed to the Ukrainians. They've had surveillance aircraft flying just outside of the border, basically monitoring everything going on in Russia. So in fact, I would say the Ukrainians probably know what the Russians are doing before the Russians know.
Well, you mentioned the Czech Republic there it's become actually the first EU country to directly supply Ukraine with weapons. We understand that some tanks and infantry fighting vehicles have been sent to Ukraine from the Czech Republic. What difference is that likely to make?
I think it'll be helpful. I think one of the really interesting statistics that's come out of the war lately is the fact that Russia is now the main supplier of equipment to Ukraine because they've captured so much Russian equipment. I mean, yes, it's going to help getting the additional equipment from the NATO countries that have the old Soviet era equipment that's been updated. But in fact, the Ukrainians are actually doing quite well.
And broadly speaking, Doug, I mean, what's your military assessment of the latest fighting in Ukraine as the threat appears to recede from the north and the Russians mass their forces in the east?
When you say the threat has receded in the north, it's basically because the Russians got their butts kicked in the north. They were basically routed. And they're saying they're going to move those troops over to the east and reinforce the east and try and sort of hold on to what they've captured in Donbass. But honestly, the troops that have been through the fighting in the north have been through the meat grinder. I don't know how many of those units are still effective. They're not getting enough time to refit before they go to the east. People keep saying there's going to be a big offensive in the east. I don't see it, not from the Russians anyway. We're going to see, I think, more Ukrainian counteroffensives. And so far, their counteroffensives have been very effective.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, because we've heard military analysts like yourself saying that they think it might take a few weeks for Russian troops to reorganize themselves and prepare for what most people expect will be a major offensive in the east. I mean, how much fighting space does this little window give the Ukrainians to either beef up their defenses or strike preemptively?
Obviously, the time is helpful to the Ukrainians. They're going to be shifting their own troops, but of course their troops are going a much shorter distance from the north just over to the eastern part of the country. And their troops are actually in much better condition, I think, than what the Russians have been going through. So a little bit of delay would be fine, I think, for the Ukrainians, but they're in pretty good shape. And I think the Russians are probably, if they're going to be doing an offensive, they're not looking forward to it, because it probably will be as unsuccessful as their Kyiv offensive.
And I mean, you know a lot about these things much more than we do. We hear that there are some of the best fighting units that Ukraine has in the east. Obviously, they've been fighting pro-Russian separatists for several years there, but they appear to be losing ground to Russian forces. I mean, how much concern is there about that?
Oh, there's definitely concern. I mean, Russia still has a very, very large military. However, they did not plan on a really long conflict like this, or longer conflict. It seems from all we've seen from the plans that have been revealed that they plan to, essentially overthrow the government in Kyiv in a few days, and that was going to be the end of it. And this sort of drawn out, protracted conflict that they're having, they weren't ready for. And we're seeing their logistics lines are being chewed up. We've seen the best Russian military units have been chewed up. It's not going well, and they're going to be using their regular troops and their conscripts to try and fight against these hardened Ukrainian troops. It's not going to be pretty.
So what's your prediction? How long do you reckon all this is going to last?
Well, ultimately, it's going to come down to some sort of diplomatic solution, and that could be quite a long time. I mean, we could see the same thing that's been going on for 8 years, a sort of a low-intensity conflict all along the border with Donbass. We'll see. I mean, the Ukrainians may push into the areas that they haven't been in since the 2014 conflict. So it could be very interesting. And lots of really terrible things could still happen. We've been seeing the war crimes that have been going on. We've seen the possibility that chemical weapons or worse could be used. So there's still a lot of terrible stuff that's going to happen. The sooner they can come to some sort of diplomatic agreement, the better. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. It's hard to imagine how the Russians could come out of this and save face.
Doug, thank you very much indeed. We always appreciate your analysis. Doug Brooks is President Emeritus of the International Stability Operations Association, and he was talking to me there from Washington.